I arrived at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston on a cold October evening, my hands stuffed in the pockets of my threadbare jacket. The wind was freezing right through my thin jacket. I'd been out of steady work for 3 months, and my bank account was hovering dangerously close to zero. The newspaper ad had been vague. Night custodian needed. Unusual hours, good pay. At this point, I didn't care about unusual hours. Good pay was all that mattered. The museum looked big against the darkening sky. I climbed the steps, my shoes scuffing against the stone. The main galleries were closing, and the last few visitors walked past me on their way out. I asked a security guard where I could find Thomas Green, and he pointed me toward an office tucked away from the main hall. I knocked on the door, trying to look more put together than I felt. "Come in, Mr. Bennett," called a voice from inside. Thomas Green sat behind a desk covered with papers and small trinkets. He was older than I expected, around his early 50s, with salt and pepper hair and a neat beard. He had on an expensive suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. His eyes checked me out right away. "You're punctual. That's good," he said, standing to shake my hand. His grip was firm, businesslike. "I assume you're here about the night custodian position?" "Yes, sir. I have my resume and references." He waved away the papers I tried to hand him. "Won't be necessary. I've already done my research on you, Mr. Bennett. You need money, and I need someone who can follow instructions precisely. Does that sound like a fair arrangement?" I nodded, surprised by how blunt he was. "Yes, that works for me." "Good." He pulled a sheet of paper from his desk drawer and slid it across to me. "These are your duties. Standard cleaning procedures, but there are a few specific requirements for this position, for this." I looked down at what I assumed would be a typical list of janitorial tasks. What I found instead made me wonder if I'd misunderstood the job entirely. "Sir, some of these instructions seem a bit unusual," I said, trying to keep my tone professional. Thomas leaned back in his chair. "This museum has certain quirks, Mr. Bennett. Old buildings often do. These procedures have been developed over many years and are essential to the smooth operation of our facility." I read through the list again. 1. Avoid the basement until 12:30 a.m. No exceptions. 2. At precisely 9:45 p.m., remove the tripping hazard from the main lobby. Do not look directly at it. 3. Lock the front entrance at 10 p.m. and check it every half hour to ensure it remains locked. 4. At 4 a.m., if you see a man in a suit in the second-floor exhibition room, tell him the museum is closed and he needs to leave. "What exactly is the tripping hazard in the lobby?" I asked. "You'll recognize it when you see it," Thomas replied, his expression giving nothing away. "Just use the mop from the custodial closet to push it into the janitor's closet. And remember, don't look directly at it." Part of me wanted to laugh, thinking this must be some kind of elaborate prank, but the serious look on Thomas's face kept me from cracking even a smile. "The pay is $25 per hour, cash, at the end of each shift," Thomas continued. "That's significantly above market rate for custodial work, as I'm sure you're aware." My eyes widened. That was more than double what I'd expected. With that kind of money, I could catch up on rent, and maybe even start paying down my credit card debt. "When do I start?" I asked, pushing aside my misgivings. "Tonight, if you're available. Your shift runs from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. I nodded. "I can start tonight." Thomas handed me a set of keys. "These will get you into all the areas you need to access. The security system will be set to recognize your presence. Any questions?" I had about 1,000 questions, but none that seemed likely to get straight answers. "No, sir. I think I've got it." "Excellent. I'll return at 6 a.m. to review your work. Good luck, Mr. Bennett." After a brief tour of the cleaning supplies and locations, Thomas left me alone in the empty museum. For the first hour or so, the job was completely normal. I dusted display cases, vacuumed carpets, and cleaned the public restrooms. The museum was quiet, but not eerily so, just the typical sounds of an old building settling. Around 9:15 p.m., I moved to the very old Egypt exhibit with my cart of supplies. That's when I first heard it, a strange noise coming from the direction of the basement door. It sounded like someone in pain, a low moan that rose and fell in pitch. I froze. The sound came again, slightly louder this time. I checked my watch. 9:18 p.m. The first rule on my list clearly stated to avoid the basement until 12:30 a.m. The moaning now sounded almost like words I couldn't quite make out, but I remembered Thomas's emphasis on following instructions precisely. Not my problem until 12:30, I muttered to myself, wheeling my cart in the opposite direction. I cranked up the volume on my earbuds and focused on cleaning the glass cases in the Asian art wing. The next time I checked my watch, it was 9:42 p.m. 3 minutes until I needed to deal with the tripping hazard in the lobby. I made my way there, wondering what I'd find. Maybe a torn carpet, a broken tile. What I saw stopped me cold. In the center of the marble floor lay a dark, pulsing mass about the size of a basketball. It wasn't solid exactly. It seemed to move and change shape every few seconds, sometimes stretching out like a tentacle before contracting again. The surface looked bright in the dim emergency lighting. I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. That's not a normal tripping hazard. Remembering the instructions, I kept my eyes averted, looking only at the floor around it. I grabbed the mop from my cart and cautiously approached. Using the handle, I prodded the mass, trying to push it toward the janitor's closet across the lobby. The thing resisted at first, then slowly began to move as I applied more pressure. It left a thin, clear trail on the floor that evaporated seconds later. I continued pushing it, careful to keep my eyes on the floor rather than the thing itself. Just as we reached the closet door, the mass suddenly elongated, stretching toward my ankle with alarming speed. I jumped back with a startled yell, nearly losing my balance. The tentacle-like extension writhed in the air for a moment, seeming to search for me. I used the mop to shove the thing the final few feet into the closet, then slammed the door shut. I leaned against it, breathing hard, until I heard a soft thump from inside, then silence. I stood there for a long moment trying to process what had just happened. That thing, whatever it was, had tried to grab me. It had moved with purpose, with intent. "I'm losing my mind," I whispered to the empty lobby. That's the only explanation. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd almost felt wrap around my ankle. I checked my watch again. 9:51 p.m. I still needed to lock the front entrance by 10 p.m. As I walked across the lobby with wobbly legs, I seriously considered walking straight out those doors and never coming back. But then I thought about my empty bank account, the past due notices, the disconnection warnings. I thought about trying to find another job that paid this well with no questions asked. $25 an hour, I reminded myself. Just follow the rules and collect the money. I locked the front doors at exactly 10 p.m., then continued with my regular cleaning duties. Every half hour I checked that the doors remained locked as instructed. The museum seemed to get more unsettling as the night went on. Shadows appeared to move in the corner of my eye. Exhibits I could have sworn were behind glass cases now looked exposed. But each time I turned to look directly, everything appeared normal. I questioned my sanity repeatedly that night, but my financial situation gave me a simple, cold answer. I couldn't afford to quit. I locked the front doors at 10 p.m., pulling on the handles twice to make sure they were secure. The sound of the lock clicking into place bounced through the empty lobby, across the marble floors and high ceilings. I made a mental note to check them again at 10:30 p.m., just like the instructions said. With the museum now completely closed off from the outside world, the atmosphere changed. The building felt different at night. Not just quiet, but watchful. The eyes of very old statues seemed to follow me as I pushed my cleaning cart down the main corridor. I tried to focus on normal tasks. There was comfort in the routine of emptying trash cans and wiping down glass surfaces. Every squeak of my cartwheels made me jump a little, but I blamed it on nerves and the weird encounter with that pulsing thing I'd shoved into the closet. At 10:30, I went back to check the front doors, still locked. I yanked on them harder than needed, like I was testing not just the lock, but my own grip on reality. "This is fine," I said to no one. "Just a normal night job with some weird rules." Back to work. I went to the American wing, dusting the frames of oil paintings with grumpy-looking colonial people. Their painted eyes looked way too knowing in the dim emergency lights. I kept my back to the walls whenever possible. At 11 p.m., I checked the doors again, still secure. The next few hours got into a pattern. Clean for 30 minutes, check the doors, repeat. Each time I made sure the locks were good, I felt a little proud, like I was figuring out this weird new job step by step. Between checks, I listened to music through my earbuds to drown out the weird sounds I couldn't explain. Faint whispers from empty rooms, the scraping of what might have been furniture moving with no one to move it. I turned up the volume and pretended I didn't notice. The Egyptian exhibit really creeped me out. The sarcophagi looked ready to open at any moment, and the glass eyes of canopic jars seemed to turn in my direction. I hurried through cleaning that section, almost knocking over my mop bucket twice. Time crawled. By 2 a.m., I was dead tired, but I stayed alert. I checked the doors again, still locked, and went back to cleaning in the European art section. At 2:28 a.m., I was wiping down a bench when a cold draft hit my neck. The air shouldn't have been moving like that in a closed building. I stopped, rag in hand, and listened. The museum had gone completely quiet. No creaking floors, no buzzing ventilation system, just total silence. I checked my watch. 2:29 a.m., almost time for another door check. Hurrying down the hallway, I turned the corner to the lobby. What I saw made my stomach drop. The huge front doors were open about 6 inches, letting in night air. The locks I had checked every half hour, the locks I had made sure were secure 6 times already, were now undone. I ran to the doors, my footsteps making loud noises through the empty space. My first instinct was to close them, to block whatever might be outside. But then I remembered Thomas's instructions. Check that the doors remain locked. They weren't locked. They weren't even fully closed. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. The list of rules suddenly felt super important. If this rule had been broken, what was supposed to happen next? Thomas hadn't told me what to do if I found the doors unlocked, only to make sure they stayed locked. Then I remembered my 4th instruction. At 4 a.m., tell the suited man in the 2nd floor exhibition room that the museum is closed. That was still over an hour away. What was I supposed to do now? A memory flashed. Thomas's parting words. Follow the instructions precisely. If there were no instructions for this situation, I needed to stick with the general ones he'd given me. The break room. I needed to get somewhere safe until my next scheduled task. I turned and ran, no longer worried about the noise I was making. The break room was located in a staff-only area near the administration offices. I fumbled with the keys Thomas had given me, found the right one, and burst inside. The small room had a table, a few chairs, a refrigerator, and a coffee maker. Nothing special, but it had a door that locked from the inside. I slammed it shut and turned the deadbolt, then backed away to the far wall. For several minutes, I stood there in the dark, listening to my own heavy breathing. Then I heard it. Footsteps in the hallway outside. Heavy, steady steps that didn't sound like they belonged to anyone who should be in the museum at this hour. The footsteps stopped right outside the break room door. I held my breath. A long scratch went down the outside of the door like something sharp being dragged across the wood. Then another. And another. The scratching continued, steady and deliberate, as if whatever was out there was testing the door's strength. The handle jiggled, once, twice, then harder and harder. The entire door shook in its frame, as something on the other side tried to force its way in. I pressed myself against the wall, hoping the lock would hold. The attack on the door continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The handle rattled so hard I thought it might break off. The scratching got more frantic, changing from methodical lines to wild, angry gouges. And then, without warning, it stopped. I stayed frozen in place, trying to hear any sound from the hallway. Nothing. The silence was almost worse than the noise had been. I checked my watch. 3:22 a.m. Still not time for my next task. According to the rules, I needed to stay put. The next 38 minutes were the longest of my life. I didn't move from my spot against the wall, barely daring to breathe. Eventually, my watch showed 3:59 a.m. It was almost time to face the suited man. I unlocked the break room door with shaking hands and looked into the hallway. Empty. No sign of whatever had tried to get in. The door looked normal. No scratches, no evidence of the violent attempt to enter. I made my way carefully to the stairs, climbing to the second floor. The exhibition room was at the end of a long corridor lined with landscape paintings. The door was closed. At exactly 4 a.m., I opened it. The room had a collection of portraits from different time periods. In the center of the room, with his back to me, stood a tall figure in a black suit. He was perfectly still, facing a large painting that showed a Victorian-era gentleman in formal clothes. I swallowed hard, remembering my instructions. My voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Sir, the museum is closed. You need to leave." The person stayed still for a moment. Then he turned to look at me in a weird way. I thought I'd see a security guard or maybe another worker. What I saw instead scared me to death. The man, if you could even call him that, wore a black suit that looked too big on his skinny body. His face looked almost human, but instead of eyes, he just had empty dark holes. Some thick black goo was dripping from these holes down his face. "I belong here," he said. Though his lips barely moved, the voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. From the walls, the ceiling, from inside my own head. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I remembered Thomas's words. Follow the instructions precisely. I had delivered my message. Now I needed to leave. "I'm sorry, I'll leave now," I said, backing toward the door. The suited man didn't try to follow me. He just watched with those awful empty holes where his eyes should be as I backed away. I closed the door between us with shaking hands, then turned the key in the lock. I leaned against the wall. I was so scared I could barely breathe. What I'd just seen wasn't possible. People don't have empty eye sockets with black stuff coming out of them. Voices don't come from everywhere at once. But I couldn't deny what had happened. The suited man was real, and he was inside the museum. And for some reason, Thomas knew he would be there. I stared at the locked door, keeping me from the suited man, trying to understand what I'd just seen. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I checked my watch. 4:05 a.m. Almost 2 hours left in my shift, and I had no idea what to do next. The list from Thomas didn't include any instructions for after telling the suited man to leave. I pulled it from my pocket, looking over the wrinkled paper for anything I might have missed. Nothing. Just 4 simple rules that suddenly seemed way too basic for whatever was happening in this museum. I backed away from the exhibition room door, keeping my eyes on it. Part of me expected the suited man to walk right through it, but the door stayed closed. Moving quietly, I went back to the stairwell and went down to the first floor. For the next hour and 55 minutes, I cleaned areas as far from both the exhibition room and the basement as possible, checking the front doors every half hour as instructed. They stayed locked, though I no longer trusted that to mean anything. At 5:55 a.m., I gathered my cleaning supplies and waited in the lobby. I'd survived the night, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. Something that existed outside the normal boundaries of reality. Thomas arrived at exactly 6 a.m. He walked through the doors like it was any normal morning. He wore the same nice suit as yesterday, looking clean and rested. "You followed the rules. Excellent," he said, looking me over. His eyes lingered on my face, taking in what must have been a haunted expression. First nights are always the hardest. "What was that thing?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "The man in the suit. His eyes." Thomas held up a hand. "I prefer not to discuss our residence in the open like this. Let's talk in my office." I followed him down the corridor, struggling to keep my composure. When we reached his office, he closed the door and sat behind his desk. "You encountered him then?" Thomas asked, his tone matter of fact. He had no eyes, just black stuff coming out of the sockets. Thomas nodded, unsurprised. "And you told him the museum was closed?" "Yes, he said he belongs here." "He does, in a way." Thomas opened a drawer and removed an envelope. "Here's your pay for the night, plus a bonus for handling the situation appropriately." He slid the envelope across the desk. I opened it to find a stack of crisp $20 bills, more than the agreed-upon amount. "There's an extra 100 in there," Thomas said. "Consider it hazard pay." I stared at the money, $200 for one night's work. I thought about my empty refrigerator, the past due rent notice, the stack of bills waiting at my apartment. "Will he be there again tonight?" I asked. "Perhaps. Perhaps not. Our residents follow patterns, but they're not entirely predictable." Thomas folded his hands on the desk. "So, Mr. Bennett, will you be returning for tonight's shift?" I should have said no. Any rational person would have walked away, but the money was more tempting than my fear. "Yes," I said. "I'll be back." Thomas smiled, a brief twitch of his lips that didn't reach his eyes. "Excellent. I have a new set of instructions for tonight." He handed me another sheet of paper. This list contained just 2 items. 1. At 1:15 a.m., place the tribal mask from storage room B on the pedestal in the East Wing's African art exhibit. 2. At 3 a.m., play the vinyl record marked with a red dot in the multimedia room. "That's it?" I asked, looking up from the paper. "What about the basement, the lobby thing, the front doors?" "Different nights, different requirements," Thomas said. "The museum has, rhythms, patterns that must be maintained. And if I don't follow these new instructions, what happens then?" Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying me. "I'd rather not discuss hypotheticals, Mr. Bennett. Simply follow the instructions as written." His deliberate vagueness made me nervous, but I tucked the paper into my pocket. "Where's storage room B?" "Down the hall from the break room. The mask will be on the 3rd shelf, wrapped in burlap. Handle it only by the edges." Thomas stood, signaling our meeting was over. "I'll see you at 6 a.m. tomorrow." I left the museum and walked home in the early morning light, the envelope of cash zipped inside my jacket. The logical part of my brain screamed at me not to go back, but my bank account disagreed. I needed this job, no matter how weird it was getting. I spent the day sleeping badly, waking up many times from dreams of empty eye sockets and black liquid. By evening, I'd convinced myself that stress and being tired had made everything seem worse than it was. Maybe the suited man was just wearing some weird costume. Maybe it was all a complicated test Thomas set up to see if I'd follow instructions under pressure. I showed up for my second shift 10 minutes early. Thomas met me in the lobby, gave me the keys, and reminded me to follow the night's instructions exactly. Then he left, and I was alone again in the museum. The first few hours went by quietly as I did normal cleaning duties. I checked my watch a lot, waiting for 1:15 a.m. when I needed to place the mask. At 12:45 a.m., I went looking for storage room B. I found it where Thomas had said. It was a small room full of artifacts not on display. The mask was on the 3rd shelf, wrapped in burlap, just like Thomas said. I carefully unwrapped it, making sure to touch only the edges like I was told. The mask was made from dark wood, with a face that had big round eyes, a long nose, and a mouth that looked like a smile, or maybe a snarl. Small shells and beads were around the edges, and old paint marked the facial features. It creeped me out, but I wrapped it back up and took it to the East Wing. The African art exhibit was barely lit by emergency lights. An empty stand was in the middle of the display, with other artifacts in glass cases around it. I checked my watch, 1:12 a.m., close enough. I unwrapped the mask and put it on the stand, facing it toward the entrance. As soon as the mask was in place, the room got warmer. I hadn't even noticed it was cold until the warmth came back. One down, one to go, I muttered to myself. I resumed my cleaning duties, keeping an eye on the time. At 2:45 a.m., I headed to the multimedia room to find the record player. The room contained various audio-visual equipment from different eras, early phonographs, film projectors, televisions, and more modern digital displays. In the corner was an old record player with a stack of vinyl records beside it. I flipped through them until I found one marked with a small red dot on the label. The record had no title, just a blank white label with that red dot. I placed it on the turntable and waited, watching the minutes tick by on my watch. At exactly 3 a.m., I lowered the needle onto the record. Nothing happened. The turntable spun, but no sound came out. I checked the power indicator. The light was on, but something was wrong with either the record or the player itself. I fiddled with the volume knob, adjusting it up and down. Still nothing. Starting to panic, I lifted the needle and looked at it. A small clump of dust had collected on the tip. I brushed it off and tried again. The seconds ticked by. 3:01 a.m. Still no sound. That's when I noticed the temperature dropping fast. My breath began to fog in front of my face. The walls around me seemed to darken, and I realized it wasn't a shadow. Dark mist was coming through the plaster and filling the room. I quickly checked the record player, looking for anything obviously wrong. The power was on, the needle was down, the record was spinning. Why wasn't it playing? The mist continued to spread, gathering in the corners of the room and moving along the floor toward my feet. The cold became intense, making my lungs hurt with each breath. I noticed a switch on the back of the player labeled speaker. It was set to off. With shaking hands, I flipped it to on and adjusted the volume again. Immediately, a low, buzzing sound filled the room, a single long note that seemed to shake the walls. The mist stopped moving forward. It hung in the air for a moment, then began to go back into the walls quickly. Within seconds, the temperature returned to normal. The record continued to play that single, boring tone. I stood still, afraid to touch anything until the record finished playing on its own about 5 minutes later. When silence returned, I carefully placed the record back with the others and left the multimedia room, closing the door behind me. The rest of the night passed without incident. At 6 a.m., Thomas arrived to relieve me, handing over another envelope of cash without asking any questions. Instead of going straight home, I headed to the Boston Public Library when it opened. The encounter with the mist had convinced me I needed to understand what was happening at the museum. The library was quiet, with only a few early patrons scattered among the reading tables. I approached the reference desk and asked for information about the Museum of Fine Arts, specifically its history and founding. The librarian directed me to several books and archived newspaper collections. I spent hours going through the material, most of which contained only standard information about exhibitions and benefactors. Then I found it. A small article from 1897 about the construction of the museum's original building. According to the article, the site had previously belonged to a society called the Order of Very Old Observation, which had conducted what the reporter delicately called unusual ceremonies of a spiritual nature there for decades. Another book, A History of Occult Practices in New England, mentioned the museum briefly. One paragraph caught my attention. The private collection of William Richardson, which formed the foundation of several prominent Boston museum collections, was rumored to contain artifacts from supernatural investigations worldwide. Richardson, known publicly as an anthropologist and art collector, privately documented encounters with what he termed entities beyond the veil of normal perception. Most scholars dismiss these accounts as products of the Victorian fascination with spiritualism. I closed the book, my mind racing. Thomas's residence, the suited man with no eyes, the black mist in the walls, the precise rituals disguised as job instructions. It all pointed to something far more dangerous than ordinary museum security. I gathered my notes and left the library, not sure if I was uncovering the truth or just feeding my own paranoia. Either way, I knew I would return to the museum that night. The money was too good, and even with everything going on, or maybe because of it, I needed to know more. I finished my second night at the museum without any other weird stuff happening after the record player thing. The mist going back into the walls really scared me, but the big envelope of cash Thomas handed me at 6 a.m. made me feel better about it. $400 for 2 nights of work. At this rate, I'd catch up on my rent and start paying down my credit cards within weeks. When I arrived for my third night, Thomas greeted me in the lobby with yet another list of instructions. This one contained 3 items. 1. At 11:30 p.m., move the blue vase from the Asian antiquities section to the storage closet by the staff bathroom. 2. At 2:15 a.m., light the 3 candles in the Colonial America exhibit for exactly 7 minutes, then put them out. 3. At 4:45 a.m., place the small wooden box from the director's office on the 3rd step of the main staircase. That's it? I asked, looking over the short list. Thomas nodded. The tasks vary in complexity, not just quantity. Follow them precisely. I took the list and pocketed it. These things I'm doing, they seem random. They serve their purpose, Thomas said, already walking toward the exit. He paused at the door. Oh, and Mr. Bennett, the basement restriction only applies until midnight. After that, you're free to go down there if needed. That caught my attention. In our first meeting, he'd been adamant about avoiding the basement until 12:30 a.m. Now he was saying midnight was fine. Before I could ask about the difference, he was gone. I spent the first few hours of my shift cleaning and thinking about what I'd found at the library. The Order of Ancient Observation, William Richardson's collection of supernatural artifacts. It couldn't be coincidence. At 11:30 p.m., I moved the blue vase like he told me to. Nothing unusual happened. I kept cleaning and watching the clock. Time seemed to move really slowly that night. As midnight got closer, I found myself checking my watch over and over, feeling weirdly pulled toward the basement door. The rule that was about to end made me curious. At exactly midnight, I stood in front of the basement door. The weird moaning sounds I'd heard on my first night weren't there. The door looked normal, just an old wooden door with a brass knob and keyhole. I should have been focusing on my cleaning duties. I should have been getting ready for the candle lighting at 2:15 a.m. Instead, I took out the keyring Thomas had given me and found the one labeled B for basement. The lock turned easily. The door opened to show a dark staircase going down. I pulled out my flashlight and pointed it into the darkness. The light showed concrete steps going down into the dark. I paused at the doorway. Thomas hadn't actually told me to go to the basement. He'd only said I could if needed. Did I need to? No. Did I want to understand what was happening in this museum? Absolutely. I stepped onto the first stair, then the second. The door stayed open behind me, showing a bit of dim light from the museum hallway. The air got colder as I went down, smelling musty like old paper and something else. Something like wet stone and rot. The basement was bigger than I expected. My flashlight cut through the darkness, showing rows of storage shelves packed with cardboard boxes, wooden crates, and plastic containers. Old display cases lined one wall, their glass fronts covered with dust. The floor was bare concrete. stained in places with what I hoped was just water damage. I walked between the shelves, my footsteps bouncing in the big space. Most of the boxes had labels with exhibit names and dates, clearly old displays that had been taken out of the museum's main areas. At the far end of the room, partly hidden behind a tall metal shelf, I noticed a section of wall that looked different from the rest. While most of the basement walls were painted cinder block, this section looked like it was made of fitted stone, like something from a much older building. I pushed the shelf aside, cringing at the scraping noise it made against the concrete floor. Behind it was a door, or really a stone rectangle carved to look like a door, with no handle or hinges. Strange symbols were carved around its edges, like nothing I recognized from any language or culture I'd studied. I ran my fingers over the carvings, following their angular shapes. As I touched the last symbol at the bottom right corner, I heard a faint click. The stone rectangle moved inward about an inch. I put my hands against the stone and pushed. It moved surprisingly easily, swinging inward to show a small chamber beyond. My flashlight showed a circular room about 15 feet across. The walls, floor, and ceiling had more of those strange symbols, arranged in circles and crossing lines. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal with a leather-bound book on it. I stepped into the room, interested in the book. The air here felt different, heavier, like it had something I couldn't explain. The symbols on the floor made a pattern that messed with my eyes, making me dizzy if I looked at them too long. The book on the pedestal was old, with cracked and faded leather. A brass clasp held it closed, but the lock was broken. There was no title on the cover, just a symbol matching one of those carved into the floor, a circle with a triangle inside it and a spiral in the center. I stopped before touching it. This felt like crossing a line, going from just being curious to actively snooping. But I'd come this far already. I opened the book. The yellow pages were covered in neat handwriting. The first page had a name and date, William Richardson, 1872. Below that was a title, A Record of Containments and Observations. I turned the page and began to read. Having now secured 13 entities of varying strength and malevolence, I must record the methods of their containment for those who will maintain my work after I am gone. Each entity requires specific rituals to remain bound to its chosen vessel. Failure to perform these rituals will result in temporary release of the entity, during which time it may seek a new host or attempt to break its bonds entirely. My hands trembled as I turned to the next page. A detailed drawing showed a tall, thin figure in a suit with empty eye sockets leaking black fluid. It was labeled The Watcher, and below it was a list of containment procedures, including regular verbal assertions of ownership of the space. I flipped through more pages, finding descriptions and drawings of other entities. A swirling mass labeled the Formless, a creature of mist called the Cold Breath, and others with names equally ominous. Each entry included specific rituals for keeping them contained. One page detailed the Doorway Guardian, described as a black mass that tested boundaries and looked for weaknesses in containment. The ritual required moving it to a specific location at a specific time using indirect contact. I recognized it immediately as the tripping hazard I dealt with on my first night. I was shocked. The strange tasks Thomas had me performing weren't random busywork or security measures. They were containment rituals, designed to keep these entities bound to their vessels. I wasn't just a night custodian. I was performing magic, or something close enough to it that the distinction didn't matter. I checked my watch. 1:58 a.m. I'd been in the basement for nearly 2 hours. The candle ritual was due in 17 minutes. I quickly photographed several pages with my phone, then closed the book and returned it to the pedestal. As I left the chamber, I carefully pulled the stone door closed behind me. It settled back into place with a soft grinding sound, the symbols realigning. I made it back upstairs just in time to light the candles in the Colonial America exhibit. as I watched the flames twinkle for exactly 7 minutes before putting them out. I couldn't help but wonder what entity this ritual was containing, and what might happen if I failed. The rest of the night passed in a blur of anxiety and revelation. I completed the final task, placing the wooden box on the 3rd step of the main staircase. With a new understanding of its purpose, every action I took now felt important. When Thomas arrived at 6 a.m., I was waiting for him in the lobby, the journal photos open on my phone. "I need to talk to you," I said, holding up the phone to show him the image of Richardson's handwriting. Thomas's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. He took out his own phone and made a call. "Janet, tell the board I'll be late this morning. Something's come up." He ended the call and turned to me. "Let's go to my office." Once inside, he closed the door and sat behind his desk. "You found the chamber." "And the journal," I said. "These tasks you've been giving me, they're rituals, containment rituals." Thomas nodded slowly. "Yes." "For what? Demons? Ghosts?" "We don't use those terms," Thomas said. "We call them entities, or residents informally." "So what you're saying," I continued, "is that this museum is full of what exactly? Evil spirits trapped in artwork?" "Not just artwork," Thomas said. "Objects, artifacts. The physical vessels vary, and they're not all evil, strictly speaking. Some are simply other, existing according to rules different from our own." I paced across the office, trying to process what I was hearing. "And these rituals keep them trapped inside their vessels?" "Contained," Thomas corrected. "Not trapped. This is their home now. We maintain the boundaries, establish the rules of coexistence." "The man in the suit," I said. "The one with no eyes. What is he?" "He is contained within the portrait in the 2nd floor exhibition room," Thomas replied. "The painting of the Victorian gentleman? That's William Richardson himself. The entity you saw is connected to that painting, though we don't know how it came to be. Richardson never explained that part in his journals." I stopped pacing and turned to Thomas. "We're not just custodians, are we?" Thomas gave a slight smile. "No, Mr. Bennett. We're wardens, guards. What the museum shows the public isn't real. Its true purpose is containment." "And what happens if these rituals aren't performed? If these entities get out?" Thomas's smile faded. "The suited man. He's one of the weaker ones. If you ever see what's in the basement after hours, you won't survive." A chill ran down my back. "What's in the basement after hours?" "Something ancient. Something that should never have been brought back. Richardson found it in a temple in Cambodia, thought he could study it, contain it. He was partially right." Thomas leaned forward. "The basement restriction isn't just for your safety. It's when we allow that particular entity limited freedom within a controlled space." "And the other night guards? The ones before me?" "Most quit when they realized what was happening," Thomas said. "A few ignored the rules, tried to interact with the entities directly. They disappeared. Disappeared or were killed. Consumed would be more accurate," Thomas said flatly. "The entities require energy to remain contained. When their rituals are neglected or performed incorrectly, they seek that energy from living sources." I sank into the chair across from Thomas, my legs suddenly weak. Why me? Why hire someone who doesn't know what's going on? "Because those who seek out this kind of knowledge usually want to use it," Thomas replied. "They come with agendas, with desires for power or understanding that the entities can exploit. I need someone practical, someone who follows instructions precisely, not out of belief or ambition, but out of simple professionalism. And pays well enough that I won't quit even when things get weird," I added. Thomas nodded slightly. "Yes, that too." I looked down at the photos on my phone, instructions for trapping weird creatures, written almost 150 years ago by a man whose portrait now had one of those creatures inside it. There are 13 of them? I asked, remembering the journal. 13 major ones, Thomas confirmed, plus a few minor manifestations that require less rigorous containment. Richardson collected them over decades of travel. Some he sought out, others found him. I thought about the black mist in the multimedia room, the tentacle-like mass in the lobby, the suited man with empty eye sockets, and according to Thomas, these were among the weaker entities. So what now? I asked. Now that I know? Now you have a choice, Thomas said. You can walk away, I won't stop you, or you can continue, with full knowledge of what you're doing and why. At the same pay rate? Thomas actually chuckled at that. Yes, Mr. Bennett, at the same pay rate. I thought about my empty bank account, my growing bills, the job market that had turned me down for months. Then I thought about the suited man saying, "I belong here," and the black mist going back into the walls when the record started playing. "I'll stay," I said, "but I want to know what I'm dealing with. No more mysteries. If I'm containing these things, I need to understand them." Thomas nodded. "Fair enough. Richardson's journals have everything. I'll let you see them, the real ones, not just what you found in the hidden chamber. But understand this. Knowing about the entities can make you a target. They're aware. They watch. They test boundaries. Like the front doors opening by themselves?" "Exactly like that," Thomas said. "When you're here alone at night, you're not just a custodian or a security guard. You're the only thing standing between them and freedom. Remember that." I left the museum that morning with a new set of instructions for my fourth night, a copy of Richardson's second journal, and thoughts about the 13 contained entities. As I walked home in the early dawn light, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see a tall figure in a black suit following me. The museum looked normal from the outside, big and fancy, but now I knew what it really was. A place that kept dangerous things locked away, where night guards did more than just watch empty rooms. And I had just agreed to be one of them. The next few nights at the museum became a tense but workable routine. Using Richardson's journal and Thomas's clear instructions, I did each ritual exactly as needed. The entities stayed in their places, but I often felt them watching me as I walked through the dark halls. The suited man showed up in his portrait room when expected. The black mass stayed where it belonged, and the mist remained stuck behind the walls. I was getting used to how things worked between me and these trapped things. By my fourth night, I'd almost caught up on my back rent. Another week of this work and I could start paying off my credit card debt. I wasn't so stressed about money anymore. The job was scary, but I knew I made the right call staying. When I arrived for my fifth night shift, something was definitely wrong. Red and blue lights flashed across the front of the museum. 2 police cars were parked crookedly near the entrance, their doors left open. A small group of officers stood in the lobby, talking quietly but seriously. I stopped at the bottom of the steps. Should I turn around? Leave? But if I didn't do the containment rituals tonight? I remembered Thomas's warning about what would happen if the entities got out. I couldn't walk away. I walked up carefully, showing my museum ID to an officer who moved to stop me. "I work here," I explained. "Night custodian. I'm supposed to start my shift now." The officer looked at my ID card, then nodded toward a man in plain clothes talking with one of the museum's day security guards. "Detective Rollins wants to talk to everyone who works here. Wait over there." I joined a small group of museum employees near the information desk. They were all talking in quiet, worried tones. "What's going on?" I asked. The security guard turned to me. "Thomas Green is missing. Didn't show up for work today, didn't call in. His assistant went to check on him at home and found his place empty with signs of a struggle." My stomach tightened. Thomas missing? He was the only one who fully understood the containment system, the only one who knew all the rituals. "When was the last time anyone saw him?" I asked. "Yesterday evening. one of the curators said. He stayed late to finish some paperwork. I left around 7 and he was still in his office. That meant he'd disappeared sometime after 7 last night and before this morning. Had something happened after I left yesterday at 6 a.m.? The detective finished his conversation and walked over to our group. I'm Detective Rawlins, he said, showing his badge. I need to speak with each of you individually about Thomas Green. Who saw him last? No one volunteered. The curator repeated what she'd told me about seeing him at 7 the previous evening. What about you? Rawlins asked, looking at me. You're the night guy, right? Bennett? I nodded. I saw him yesterday morning when I finished my shift at 6. He seemed normal. Just gave me my instructions for tonight and sent me home. Instructions? Rawlins raised an eyebrow. What kind of instructions? I struggled to come up with an answer that wouldn't sound insane. Just cleaning priorities. Which exhibits needed attention, that sort of thing. Can I see these instructions? He gives them to me verbally. I lied. I couldn't show him the list of containment rituals. How would I explain placing tribal masks on pedestals at specific times or lighting candles in empty rooms? Rawlins looked at me for a moment, then pulled out a small notebook. Did Mr. Green mention any concerns? Anyone who might wish him harm? Any unusual visitors? I shook my head. No, nothing like that. The detective questioned me for another 10 minutes about my relationship with Thomas, how long I'd worked at the museum, what my duties were. I kept my answers vague and hoped he wouldn't ask for details. Finally, Rawlins closed his notebook. We'll be doing a complete search of the museum, but you can all go back to your regular duties. If you remember anything that might be important, call me. He handed out business cards. As the others left, I stayed where I was. A complete search of the museum? What if they found Richardson's journals? Or worse, what if they messed with one of the containment vessels? Detective, I said quickly, about the search, will it interfere with the museum's operations? I have specific tasks that need to be completed tonight. Rawlins gave me an odd look. The janitor's worried about cleaning schedules while his boss is missing. I tried to look responsible rather than panicked. It's just that Mr. Green is very particular about certain exhibits being maintained a certain way. We'll try not to get in your way, Rawlins said dismissively, but finding Mr. Green is our priority right now. The police spent the next hour searching the museum, focusing on Thomas's office and the administrative areas. I cleaned nervously nearby, watching as they rifled through papers and checked closets. None of them ventured into the exhibition areas or basement, much to my relief. By 10 o'clock, they'd found nothing useful and began to leave. Rawlins was the last to go, pausing at the front doors to give me a final warning. Don't touch anything in Green's office. We may need to come back for a more thorough examination. I promised to leave everything untouched, then locked the doors behind him. As his car pulled away, I leaned against the wall and took a deep breath. Thomas was gone. I was now the only person who knew about the entities, the only one who could maintain the containments. I pulled out the list of instructions Thomas had given me for tonight. 3 tasks. 1. At 11:45 p.m., replace the faded red book on the 3rd shelf of the rare books exhibit with the identical volume from the director's office. 2. At 2:30 a.m., move the small jade figurine in the Asian artifacts display 3 inches to the left. 3. At 4 a.m., place 3 white roses in the vase next to the Renaissance painting of the woman in blue. Simple enough, though I now understood each task maintained the boundary between our world and whatever these entities truly were. I needed to follow these instructions perfectly, especially with Thomas gone. I started my normal cleaning routine, keeping one eye on the clock. The museum felt different tonight, tense, expectant, as if the building itself knew its master was missing. At 11:30 p.m., I went to Thomas's office to retrieve the red book. The room was just as the police had left it. Desk drawers pulled open, papers scattered, chairs askew. I found the book exactly where Thomas had said it would be, on the shelf behind his desk. As I reached for it, I noticed something unusual, a sealed envelope with my name on it, tucked between the book and the shelf. I stared at it, tempted to open it immediately, but checked my watch. 11:38 p.m. The ritual came first. I pocketed the envelope and took the book to the rare books exhibit, replacing the faded volume precisely at 11:45 p.m. Back in the break room, I opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter in Thomas's neat handwriting. Mr. Bennett, if you are reading this, I am no longer able to serve as warden of the museum. I have watched your work carefully these past nights and believe you have the right qualities to take my place. The entities will test you, especially now. Trust Richardson's journals and your own instincts. Should anything happen to me, you will find complete instructions in the false bottom of the leftmost drawer in my desk. The key is taped beneath the third step of the basement stairs. Remember, the museum must never be left unattended during night hours. The consequences would be catastrophic. Thomas Green. The letter slipped from my fingers. Thomas had prepared for his own disappearance. He'd chosen me as his successor, but why? What had happened to him? I checked my watch again, 1:45 a.m. Still time before my next task. I decided to find the key Thomas mentioned. The basement stairs creaked under my weight as I descended. I found the key exactly where the letter said it would be, taped to the underside of the third step. It was small and old-fashioned, made of tarnished brass. Back in Thomas's office, I unlocked the leftmost drawer and felt around for the false bottom. A wooden panel lifted away, revealing a leather-bound notebook and a set of keys labeled with names I didn't recognize. Richardson's study, archives, vault. I flipped through the notebook. It contained detailed instructions for every containment ritual, organized by day of the week and time of year. Tonight's rituals matched what Thomas had given me, but there were dozens more. A complex calendar of tasks that maintained the barriers between our world and whatever lay beyond. A notation at the bottom of today's page caught my eye. Warning: 5th day rituals most vulnerable to interference. Monitor closely. I checked my watch again. 2:22 a.m. I needed to move the jade figurine in 8 minutes. I tucked the notebook into my pocket and hurried to the Asian artifacts display. The figurine sat on a small pedestal inside a glass case. I unlocked the case with my master key and carefully moved the jade piece exactly 3 inches to the left. As soon as it was in position, I felt a subtle change in the air pressure, as if the building had exhaled. I relocked the case and continued with my regular cleaning duties, checking my watch frequently. Everything seemed to be going smoothly despite Thomas's absence, until 3:15 a.m. I was cleaning the windows in the Greek antiquities section when I heard it. A wet, slithering sound coming from the direction of the basement door. At the same moment, the temperature plummeted. My breath clouded in front of my face. I turned slowly, already knowing something was very wrong. Black liquid oozed from beneath the basement door, spreading across the floor in pulsing tendrils. This wasn't supposed to happen. The entity in the basement should have been contained. A movement in my peripheral vision made me spin around. There, at the end of the hallway, stood the suited man, not in his portrait room where he belonged, but free in the corridor. His empty eye sockets leaked that same black fluid, creating trails down his gaunt face. Multiple containment breaches at once. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. I backed away, mind racing. If someone had sabotaged the containments, I needed to know which ones and how to fix them. I ran for the security office, where monitors showed feeds from cameras throughout the museum. Looking at the screens, I saw more signs of breach. Mist seeping from walls in the European gallery, display cases vibrating in the Egyptian exhibit, shadows moving against the flow of light in the American wing. And then I saw her, a woman in dark clothes moving purposefully through the East Wing, taking objects from their displays and placing them in wrong positions. The saboteur. I watched as she lifted a clay idol from its case and placed it on a windowsill across the room. Immediately, the air around it darkened, and the shadows in that room began to twist unnaturally. I grabbed a flashlight and Thomas's notebook, frantically flipping to the section on containment breaches. The instructions were clear. Return all objects to their proper positions before dawn, or the entities would fully manifest and escape. I ran toward the east wing, taking the service corridors to avoid the suited man and the spreading black liquid. The museum had become a maze of dangers, with entities pushing against their weakened boundaries throughout the building. I found the woman in the African art exhibit, just as she was removing a ceremonial mask from its display stand. She was middle-aged, with sharp features and calculating eyes. Something about her looked like someone I knew, though I was certain we'd never met. "Stop!" I shouted, more forcefully than I intended. She turned, surprised but not frightened. The mask dangled from her hand. "Well," she said, looking me up and down, "you must be the new night guard. Bennett, right?" "Put the mask back," I demanded, stepping closer. "You don't know what you're doing." She laughed, a cold laugh that bounced around the empty gallery. "I know exactly what I'm doing. Thomas said you'd be trouble. He didn't think you'd figure it out so quickly." "Thomas? You know where he is?" "Let's just say he's been contained." She smiled at her own joke. "I worked here for 7 years. 7 years watching Thomas perform his little rituals, keeping all that power locked away. He never trusted me enough to share the truth. That's why she seemed familiar. Her photo might have been in employee files I'd seen during my training. You're Janet Fisher, I realized. Thomas's former assistant. Former assistant, future master, she corrected. The entities are wasted here, trapped in these objects. Do you have any idea what they can do? What they can give to someone who frees them? They're dangerous, I said, taking another step toward her. You can't control them. Janet's expression hardened. Control them? No. But I can bargain with them. They offered me power in exchange for freedom. Real power, Bennett. The kind that changes lives. They're lying to you, I insisted. They'll consume you the moment they're free. That's what Thomas said when he fired me, Janet sneered. He caught me talking to the suited man, thought I was compromised. He was right, of course, but too late. I'd already made my deal. She placed the mask on the floor, face up. Immediately, the eyes of the mask began to glow with a dull red light. The temperature in the room dropped further. I lunged forward, grabbing for the mask, but Janet was faster. She kicked it across the floor, sending it sliding under a display case. Good luck putting everything back before dawn, she taunted. I've moved 17 objects. The containments are failing as we speak. She turned and ran. I had a split-second decision to make. Chase her or retrieve the mask. The mask had to come first. I dropped to my knees, reaching under the display case until my fingers touched wood. I pulled the mask out and returned it to its stand. The red glow faded from its eyes. 1 down, 16 to go. I checked Thomas's notebook, matching objects to their proper locations. The clay idol in the east wing, a bronze dagger in the medieval exhibit, a small mirror in the Victorian display. Each one had been moved to disrupt its containment. I rushed through the museum, running out of time. The suited man showed up twice more in my path, forcing me to find other routes. The black liquid from the basement had spread throughout the first floor, making certain corridors impossible to cross. Fog and darkness filled entire rooms. By 5:30 a.m., I had put back 15 of the 17 objects. Dawn was coming. I could see the sky getting lighter through the museum windows. The strange figures got more restless as their freedom disappeared. Wind blew through the building, though no windows were open. Displays rattled. Lights blinked. I found the 16th object, a small silver box, hidden behind a statue in the sculpture garden. I returned it to its velvet cushion in the jewelry exhibit, then checked the notebook for the final item. The clay idol. According to the diagram, it belonged in a specific case in the Mesopotamian gallery. A case I hadn't checked yet, because the black liquid had blocked the main entrance to that wing. I took the service elevator to the second floor, hoping to enter the gallery from above. The doors opened to a terrifying sight. The suited man stood directly in front of me, black fluid now streaming from his eye sockets. Behind him, Janet Fisher was holding the clay idol. "Too late," she said. "The final containment is breaking. Can you feel it?" I could. The air felt different, like it was getting harder to breathe. Through the windows, I could see the sky turning gray with approaching dawn. Minutes, maybe seconds left. "The entities won't give you what you want," I said, trying to keep her talking while I inched forward. "They'll destroy everything, including you." "You sound just like Thomas," she replied. "So certain you know their true nature. They're not evil, Bennett. They're just different, operating under different rules. Then why is he here?" I nodded toward the suited man. "Why is he guarding you?" Janet glanced at the entity, then back at me. "He's not guarding me. He's waiting." The suited man took a step toward her. Janet's confident expression hesitated. "Give me the idol," I said quietly. "It's not too late." For a moment, Janet paused. The suited man moved closer to her, his blank face turning toward her. She held the idol tight. I saw my opening and jumped forward, grabbing the idol from her hands. I turned and ran for the Mesopotamian gallery. Janet screamed behind me, a sound cut terribly short. I didn't look back. The gallery was dark, with only emergency lights on. I found the case where the idol belonged and put it on its stand. As soon as it was in place, a shockwave of energy went through the museum. The building shook once, then went quiet. I turned and saw the suited man standing in the doorway. We stared at each other, me breathing hard, him completely still. Then, slowly, he started to disappear, his body becoming see-through until nothing was left but a few drops of black liquid on the floor. I ran back to where I'd left Janet, but she was gone. No body, no blood, no sign she'd ever been there. Just empty corridor. By the time the first morning staff arrived at 6:30 a.m., I had cleaned up what little evidence remained of the night's events. The strange things had returned to their containers. The museum looked normal, except for Thomas Green still being gone. I waited in the lobby, Thomas's notebook and keys in my pocket. The sun was up. I was tired but alert, still trying to make sense of everything that happened. A courier arrived at 7:15 a.m., bringing a package addressed to me. Inside was an envelope with legal documents giving me authority over the museum's special collections, signed by Thomas and dated the previous day. Also inside was a handwritten note. "The responsibility is now yours.